All right, so today we're going to be looking at Rework
All right.
by Jason Fried and David Heinemeier Hansson.
Awesome.
So this is a book that I think a lot of people have probably heard of.
Uh-huh.
It's been around for a while,
Yeah.
but it's still incredibly relevant, I think,
Mm,
even more so today than when it first came out.
I think so.
So we've got our notes, we've got our highlights ready to go.
Sounds good.
I think this will be a fun one.
Yeah, I'm excited.
So this book, it's not like your typical business book, you know. It's not filled with like all the corporate jargon and
Yeah.
like, you know, those tired cliches.
Yeah, definitely not.
It kind of throws out the traditional playbook
Mhm.
and it really makes you rethink how we approach work and success.
I think what's so refreshing about it is that it's not just about like starting a business.
Yeah.
It really challenges you to question like the very foundations of work itself
Yeah.
and all of these assumptions we have about, things that we just take for granted, like the need for constant growth or
Mhm.
long-term planning or, even that whole hustle culture mentality.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that really struck me when I was reading this was how they encourage us to ignore the real world.
Right.
And at first I was kind of like, well, that sounds a little reckless.
Uh-huh.
But then when you dig deeper, they actually back it up with their own
Right.
experience at their company, 37 Signals, which is a software company.
Yeah.
And they've found a lot of success with a distributed team, you know, no dedicated sales force.
Mm,
They deliberately, you know, try to stay small.
right.
And it really makes you question all of those so-called rules, you know, that we're
Yeah.
often told are essential for success.
Yeah, that's like a core theme that runs through the entire book,
Yeah.
is challenging the status quo.
Yeah.
Take planning, for example.
Okay.
They argue that traditional long-term planning is often just like guesswork,
Right.
disguised as strategy. And it's a direct quote from the book. Unless you're a fortune teller, long-term business planning is a fantasy.
It's so true.
Right.
So instead of like getting bogged down in all these predictions and trying to, you know,
Yeah.
predict the future, which is impossible,
Totally.
they suggest focusing on making decisions in the present moment. Like
Yeah.
when you actually have the most relevant information,
Mhm.
it's almost like they're giving us permission to ditch those like rigid 5-year plans
Yeah,
and embrace a more agile and like responsive approach,
absolutely.
which I really appreciate.
Yeah, and that agility really ties into their concept of like the power of small.
Okay.
They argue that small isn't just a stepping stone on the way to something bigger.
Yeah.
It can be a destination in itself.
Right.
And it offers advantages like, flexibility and the ability to like adapt quickly to change.
Yeah.
And you can look at companies like Craigslist or the Drudge Report.
Mm-hmm.
Like they've achieved massive success
Right.
while remaining relatively small and nimble. So it's not always about being the biggest.
Yeah. I love that idea.
Yeah.
It's really empowering, I think,
Yeah.
especially for, you know, someone like me who's sometimes a little bit intimidated by
Sure.
like the thought of building something huge.
Right.
Like Rework kind of makes me think that, you know, maybe smaller, more focused ventures
Mhm.
can have just as much impact.
Yeah, for sure.
But then that begs the question, how do you actually go from an idea
Yeah.
to something tangible?
That's where another key principle of rework comes in.
Oh,
Action over ideas.
yeah, right.
They drive home the point that ideas are basically worthless without execution. We've all heard people say, oh, I had the idea for eBay years ago.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But it's not about who had the idea first. It's about
No.
who took action and brought it to life.
So it's not just about like brainstorming, coming up with these brilliant concepts. It's
Yeah.
about actually like getting your hands dirty
Yeah.
and building something.
They encourage us to like stop overthinking and just start doing.
Okay.
Don't get stuck in the planning phase forever,
Yeah.
Build a prototype test.
Yeah.
Your assumptions get feedback.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you actually learn and refine your ideas.
This is making me rethink my whole approach to side projects.
Really?
I tend to get stuck in the planning stage, but Rework is inspiring me to just start creating.
Awesome.
But what about resources? Like, don't you need a lot of money and people
No.
to make something truly great?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
In fact, rework suggests that limitations can actually be a catalyst for creativity.
Really?
Like, think of it like a haiku.
Okay.
The constraints of that form force the poet to be really concise and evocative with their language.
Right.
And the same principle can apply in business.
So you're saying that having limited resources can actually force you to be more resourceful?
Exactly.
That's a fascinating concept.
And it plays out in the real world, too.
Okay.
Take Southwest Airlines, for example. Their decision to only use Boeing 737s might seem like a limitation at first,
Right.
but it actually streamlines their operations. It simplifies training. It reduces costs.
Okay.
So ultimately, it makes them more efficient.
So they've turned a constraint into a competitive advantage.
Exactly.
It's like they're saying sometimes less is more.
Yeah.
Like by focusing your efforts and your resources, you can actually achieve a greater impact.
Mm-hmm.
But I imagine you as a listener might be wondering,
Sure.
okay, so how does this all translate into actually getting work done effectively?
Well, that's where their insights on productivity and focus come in.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Rework offers practical advice on how to manage your time and energy wisely, especially in today's, distraction-filled world.
Yeah, I think we could all use some help in that department.
One of their key suggestions is to create what they call alone zones.
Okay.
So these are like dedicated blocks of time for deep, focused work, where you eliminate all distractions.
Okay.
They argue that interruptions are productivity killers,
Right.
and that carving out these uninterrupted periods is crucial for doing your best work.
I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah.
I know I'm much more productive when I can shut out the noise and really focus on a task. But what about those unavoidable meetings? They seem to be a part of life no matter what you do.
They address that head on.
Okay.
Fried and Hansson actually call meetings toxic,
Oh, wow.
and they suggest avoiding them whenever possible.
Okay.
They even break down the hidden costs of meetings,
All right.
pointing out that a 1-hour meeting with 10 people
Yeah.
actually costs the company 10 hours of potential individual productivity.
Wow, I never thought of it that way.
It makes you think twice about scheduling that next meeting right.
It does.
So what's their alternative?
Yeah.
How do you make decisions and collaborate effectively without these endless meetings?
Right.
Well, they encourage finding alternative ways to communicate,
Okay.
like using email or shared documents or project management tools. And if a meeting is absolutely necessary,
Yeah.
they advocate for keeping it short-focused
Right.
and with a clear agenda and desired outcome.
Oh, okay.
It's about respecting everyone's time and energy.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's about being intentional with how you spend your time, making sure that every meeting has a purpose.
Absolutely.
So rework is about challenging those traditional business norms, embracing constraints,
Yeah.
prioritizing action and focus. But what about the bigger picture? How do you actually build a successful and sustainable business in the long run?
Well, that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll explore their unconventional approaches to building a business.
Sounds good.
But it's not just about profit, but also about creating something meaningful and fulfilling.
All right, so stay tuned.
Yeah.
We'll be right back.
Sounds good. One of the things that really struck me about Rework is how they kind of turn traditional business thinking on its head, especially when it comes to marketing and promotion.
Okay.
They have this really refreshing, honest, almost contrarian approach,
Yeah, you're right. It's like they're saying, forget everything you thought you knew about PR and marketing.
Right.
I remember they basically told us to forget about chasing those big media placements. Trying to get featured in the Wall Street Journal or something.
Exactly.
Wow.
They argue that for smaller companies especially,
Right.
it's far more effective to focus on building an audience organically.
Okay.
It's about creating valuable content that draws people in naturally, rather than just blasting out these generic press releases that just get lost in the noise.
It's like they're saying that instead of interrupting people with messages they don't want, you should create something so good that they come to you.
Yeah.
Exactly. But isn't that a much slower process?
Sure.
I mean, those big media hits can really put you on the map quickly.
They acknowledge that it takes time, but they believe it's a more sustainable and authentic way to build a brand.
Okay.
They actually compare traditional press releases to spam.
Really?
Think about it.
Yeah.
A press release is often like a mass-produced message sent to a bunch of people who probably don't care.
Right.
It's one-way communication.
Yeah.
Doesn't really build a relationship.
That's a really interesting point. I guess it makes sense that building a loyal following over time might be more valuable than a brief burst of attention from a media outlet that might not even resonate with your target audience.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you're not chasing headlines, how do you actually get your message out there?
Well, Rework suggests focusing on building relationships with journalists and influencers who are already interested in your industry or your niche. It's about being really targeted and genuine in your outreach.
Okay.
rather than just like trying to get your name out there in any way possible.
So it's about quality over quantity. It's about finding the right people to connect with.
Exactly.
Even if it's a smaller group. But it's not just about reaching out to the media, is it?
No.
What other unconventional marketing strategies do they suggest?
Well, they emphasize the importance of teaching.
Okay.
They believe that sharing your knowledge and expertise is a really powerful way to connect with potential customers and build trust.
That's intriguing because most businesses are so guarded about their secrets,
Yeah, they're afraid someone's going to steal their ideas.
Right, exactly. But Fried and Heinemeier Hansson seem to have a different perspective.
They do. They use chefs as an example. Chefs readily share their recipes and techniques through cookbooks and cooking shows.
Right.
They understand that sharing their knowledge doesn't diminish their value.
Yeah.
It actually enhances it.
That's a great analogy, I guess, when you're really confident in your skills and your abilities. You're not afraid to let others in on some of your secrets. And it probably helps that a chef's personality and unique style can't be replicated, even if someone copies their recipe exactly.
Exactly.
But this idea of teaching as marketing, how would that actually work for, say, a software company?
It could involve creating like helpful blog posts or tutorials or webinars that demonstrate your expertise and provide value to your target audience.
Right.
It's about positioning yourself as a thought leader and a trusted resource rather than just a company trying to sell something.
I'm starting to see how this all ties together.
Yeah.
It's about building genuine connections, providing real value,
Right.
and letting your personality and expertise shine through.
Exactly.
But what about transparency? Like, how much should a business actually reveal about its inner workings?
Rework encourages businesses to be really open and honest about how they operate. They even use the phrase, nobody likes plastic flowers. It's those imperfections and quirks. That makes something real and interesting.
So it's about embracing authenticity rather than trying to project this perfect, polished image.
Yeah, I think people are tired of that.
I think so, too. We're all tired of those overly slick marketing campaigns that feel fake and impersonal.
Exactly. And they actually talk about the Japanese concept of wabi-sabi, which values authenticity and imperfection over like a shiny facade.
So it's about embracing those cracks and scratches, the things that make something unique and real.
Exactly.
So we've talked about challenging the status quo, embracing constraints, prioritizing action and focus. And now we're adding authenticity and transparency to the mix.
It's a whole new way of thinking about building a business.
It is, but what about the people who actually make it all happen? How does Rework approach the topic of hiring?
Well, just like with everything else. Their approach to hiring is unconventional and thought-provoking.
All right, I'm ready to have my mind blown again.
Tell me, what are some of their more radical ideas when it comes to hiring?
They actually call resumes ridiculous.
Wow,
and suggest forgetting about formal education as a primary hiring criteria. They believe that resumes often present like a really distorted picture of a candidate's abilities and that years of schooling don't necessarily translate into real-world skills. So they encourage us to look beyond those traditional metrics and focus on what truly matters, skills, personality, and a candidate's ability to actually get things done.
So instead of looking at where someone went to school or how many years of experience they have, you should focus on what they can actually do and how they fit into your company culture.
Exactly. They believe that culture fit is crucial. And that you should be looking for people who share your values and work ethic, regardless of their background or credentials.
But how do you actually assess those things without relying on resumes and interviews?
What are their alternative methods for, like, finding the right people?
One of their key pieces of advice is to do it yourself first. They argue that before you hire someone for a job, you should try to do it yourself.
Oh, interesting.
To gain a deeper understanding of what it actually entails. That way, you'll be better equipped to evaluate a candidate's skills and determine whether they're truly a good fit.
That's a really practical suggestion. I can see how having like firsthand experience in a role would give you a much better perspective on what to look for in a potential hire.
For sure.
Like you're not just relying on a job description or someone else's interpretation of what the job requires.
Exactly.
You've actually been in the trenches yourself.
And they emphasize the importance of hiring when it hurts.
What does that mean?
don't hire out of convenience.
Okay.
Or because you think someone looks good on paper.
Right.
Hire because you have a real pressing need that needs to be filled.
So it's about being strategic and patient. Yeah. With your hiring decisions, don't just fill a position to check it off your list. Right. Make sure it's a real need.
Exactly.
And that you're finding the right person for the role.
But what about the size of the team?
Yeah.
Like, how do you know when it's the right time to grow your team?
Right.
They actually caution against hiring too quickly.
Oh.
Because use this clever analogy of like a cocktail party full of strangers.
Okay.
If you hire too many people too fast, you end up with a team that's not really connected.
Right.
Or able to communicate effectively.
Okay.
It takes time for people to build relationships and establish trust.
So it's like you want to make sure your team has a strong foundation and a shared understanding before you start adding a lot of new people to the mix.
Exactly.
I imagine that's especially important when you're working with a remote team.
Right.
Which Fried and Hansson are big proponents of.
They argue that the best talent is everywhere.
Yeah.
And that geography shouldn't limit your hiring pool.
Right.
I mean, their own company is a great example of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Team members spread out all over the world.
That's amazing. It really shows that you can build a successful business without being tied to a specific location. But I imagine managing a remote team comes with its own unique challenges.
It does.
How do they suggest overcoming those challenges?
Right.
And ensuring that everyone feels connected and productive?
They offer practical tips on how to make remote work successful.
Okay.
Like ensuring that there's some overlap in work hours to facilitate like real-time collaboration and scheduling regular in-person meetups to maintain team cohesion and build those personal connections.
So it's about finding that balance between the flexibility of remote work and the need for human connection and teamwork.
Exactly.
It sounds like Rework is packed with these unconventional yet practical insights that can help you build a more agile, efficient, and fulfilling business.
Absolutely.
But what about when things go wrong?
Okay.
How do they suggest handling those inevitable challenges and setbacks that every business faces?
Well, that's where we'll delve into some of their more nuanced advice on damage control company culture and the importance of embracing evolution.
Stay with us as we continue to unpack the wisdom of Rework. So we've uncovered a lot of these like really practical insights from Rework about like building a business.
Right.
But what I find truly fascinating is how they kind of weave in these bigger picture ideas about work and life.
Yeah.
Like, for example, they really caution against chasing that myth of the overnight success.
Yeah, that's so important. They emphasize that like real lasting success takes time, persistence, a willingness to put in the work, even when nobody's watching or applauding your efforts.
Yeah, it's a refreshing dose of reality compared to that whole, get rich quick mentality.
Right.
That's so prevalent these days.
Everywhere.
It really, it can definitely relate to that.
Yeah.
It's easy to get discouraged when you see others seemingly achieving success overnight. But Rework reminds us that those stories are often just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
There's a lot of hard work and dedication that goes on behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
And speaking of change and adaptation, another key concept they highlight is embracing evolution. They encourage businesses to be flexible and willing to let go of things that are no longer serving them, even customers.
They actually go so far as to suggest like letting customers outgrow you.
Really?
If their needs no longer align with your product or service.
Okay.
It might seem counterintuitive at first.
It does.
But their point is that like trying to be everything to everyone will ultimately dilute your focus and prevent you from serving your core audience well.
Yeah, wouldn't you as a listener agree that it's better to excel in a specific area rather than trying to be a jack of all trades and master of none?
100%.
And this kind of ties into their philosophy of saying no.
Right.
They advocate for saying no by default, not just to customers, but to distractions, unnecessary features, even to some of your own ideas.
It's about being fiercely protective of your time and energy.
Yeah.
And making sure you're focusing on the things that truly matter.
So it's about prioritizing and making conscious choices about where you direct your efforts.
Yeah.
It's about having the discipline to stay focused on your goals.
Right.
Even when there are a million other things vying for your attention.
A million other things.
And speaking of focus, I'm curious to hear their thoughts on inspiration and the creative process. Like, how do you actually come up with those innovative ideas and solutions that set you apart?
They have a really interesting perspective on inspiration.
Okay.
They say, and I love this quote, inspiration is perishable. It's like you have to seize those moments of inspiration when they strike.
Yeah.
Because they don't last forever.
So you're saying that you can't just wait for inspiration to strike.
Right.
You have to be ready to capture it when it does.
Exactly. It's like you have to keep that creative muscle flexed.
Right.
And be prepared to act when those brilliant ideas pop into your head.
That's such a great point.
Yeah.
It's easy to get bogged down in the day-to-day grind.
Right.
And forget to make space for those creative sparks.
Fully.
But Rework reminds us that those moments of inspiration are precious.
Yeah.
And we should nurture them.
Uh-huh.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Rework, what would you say is the core message the authors are trying to convey?
At its heart, Rework is a call to action.
Okay.
It's about taking control of your work, challenging conventional wisdom, and creating something meaningful on your own terms.
Right.
It's about building a business and a life that you truly love.
And that's a message that resonates deeply, especially in today's world where work often feels overwhelming and out of our control.
It's easy to feel that way.
It really is. You know, it's empowering to think that we actually have the power to shape our own work experiences and create something that aligns with our values and passions.
Absolutely. And for anyone who's feeling inspired to learn more, the authors offer a wealth of resources at the end of the book, including their blog, Signal versus Noise, where they continue to share their insights on business design and culture.
So as we close our exploration of Rework, here's a final provocative thought for you to ponder.
Okay.
The author suggests that the best talent is everywhere. And with the rise of remote work, what might that mean for you and your future career choices?
That's a good question.
Maybe it's time to reevaluate your own assumptions about where and how you work.
Rework encourages us to think differently about work.
Yeah.
And to create a more fulfilling and meaningful work life.
Right.
It's a message that's more relevant than ever.
Absolutely.
In today's rapidly changing world.
So go out there, challenge those outdated norms, embrace those constraints, and build something amazing.
Have fun.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Rework.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time for another insightful exploration.
Sounds good.
Of a topic that matters to you.